Hi, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, the state is expected to get $4 billion. That's a B, $4 billion in health care funds. Carolyn Scanlan joins us to chat about how that money should be spent. But first, we're going to take a look at other aspects of the stimulus package with representatives from the business community. That and more following these words.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Hi, welcome back to the program. Well, Governor Rendell is predicating any budget success for next year's fiscal budget. Hey, how about balancing the budget for this year on a huge pot of money he's expected to get from the federal government to help balance the budget? It's the stimulus package. Joining me to talk about that is Fred Anton. He's sitting right across here. Fred Anton, CEO of the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association, and Gene Barr. He's the Vice President for Government and Public Affairs at the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. I got that out quickly, guys. Fred Anton, I want to talk with you first. In February, Governor Rendell got up before the General Assembly, said $28+ billion, but I need help from the federal government, right? Right. Huge stimulus package, $11 billion, $16 billion. I've seen different numbers. What should Governor Rendell be talking about right now?
I want to announce right here today, the budget crisis for Pennsylvania has been solved. There is no budget crisis in Pennsylvania. The $16 billion, even if it's over 3 years, ought to be enough to close the gap in any of those 3 years. The question now is coordinating the federal stimulus with requirements for spending in the state. Just yesterday, the 3 or 4 presidents of major institutions, Graham Spangler and others, were here meeting, and Governor Rendell said they would receive their funding, that their funding would not be eliminated as it usually is every year. No, they're going to receive it from the federal stimulus. And they're saying, oh, we still need more. We're still going to have to make a tuition increase. I call on Governor Rendell to come out with a new plan, a new budget that gives the state spending and gives in detail just how the federal stimulus money will be coordinated with the state budget.
That's a great point. Gene, do you think Governor Rendell ought to go before the legislature again? I mean, we've gotten these reports out of the governor's office. Fred's on to something here, where there's some money for here, some money for there, how they might use it for transportation. We got all sorts of. Should he come back to the legislature, do you think, and just simply say, "This is how This is how I recommend to you that we spend the money"?
Well, I think we really need to have a good, long, hard discussion to go back to what Fred said about this, because we can take these stimulus dollars and actually put ourselves in a worse hole in the next few years. If, for example, we go out and expand programs, create new programs that in a year or two we're going to have to find more money for, we're actually going to be worse off, as is the case in unemployment comp, potentially education. As Fred said, we need to look at that and say, what are our needs, what holes do we have in the budget, and try and fill those holes rather than go out and try and expand things. It would be a huge problem for 2 years from now if we get into that kind of situation.
Stuff, you would expect, however, to come up in the legislative hearings, in the appropriation committees, but it's not a bad idea, it seems to me, for him to come back to the legislature, because, that will focus everybody, the public's attention, right, Fred?
I mean,
But Senator Brubaker
from Lancaster
County is on to something when he called for a special task force of 8 people to make sure every stimulus dollar is properly spent. He's on to something, but it's not quite focused in the way I would want to see it focused. Now, one thing we don't want to have out, I think the point Gene makes is a major point. We don't want a Pennsylvania stimulus program on top of the federal stimulus program. We want to use the stimulus to solve Pennsylvania's budgetary problems without having a lot of unfortunate things like eliminating the 1% of the sales tax that merchants get for collecting it. In other words, we want to solve those problems that we were.
So your point is that this is a one-time shot.
Absolutely.
If the legislature buys into expanding programs, your concern would be that we buy into debt down the line that raises the cost of government, and then the stimulus goes away, and that leaves another. Go ahead.
Absolutely, and let me give you a perfect example. Many people have seen the new unemployment compensation monies that are coming to the states.
Right.
What people don't often see, and one of the reasons you've seen many governors say, I don't want it, is in order to do that, you've got to expand your benefits and programs to a large degree. Right. And you can't change them. You can't sunset them because that would make you ineligible. You also, and in the case of Pennsylvania, we have certain things we think need to be changed in the current system that are unfair and inequitable. We can't change those if you take the federal dollars. So what happens is if you take the roughly $273 million of federal money, you indebt yourself for hundreds of millions of dollars down the road.
What you mean.
It doesn't make any sense for us.
All right, we're talking with Fred Anton and Gene Barr. We're getting the business community's views of the stimulus package, that and more after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by PAConstructionJobs.com. For more information about rewarding careers in the highway construction industry, visit PAConstructionJobs.com. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Welcome back to the program. We're talking about Governor Rendell's budget, $28 billion or so, a bunch of money coming in from the stimulus package. It hopefully will balance the budget. There's a big debate about how to spend that money. We're hearing from Fred Anton and Gene Barr on that subject now. All right, let's go to a couple of ideas. Number one, polls have shown, Gene Barr, sales tax for counties, no go. People don't want school districts consolidated. They are okay with video poker or poker machines. You know, we have kind of a gaming culture. What's the Chamber's biggest concern about the potential for taxes given this environment?
Well, one of the big things we'd like to see done, in all honesty, is you've got concerns, you've got things that you'd like to see. We believe there are actually opportunities here. We've asked for years to restructure Pennsylvania's business tax climate. We have the second highest corporate net income tax rate. The way that we treat business losses is second worst in the U.S., so we have an opportunity here to change that because, let's be honest, a lot of businesses are losing money anyway, so it's not going to have as immediate of an impact. But, yeah, there are some other things that concern us. One of the things out there is the 2%, what's called MCO, managed care option, that would be put on insurance premiums. And the concern is that at a time when people are unfortunately increasingly losing their employer-sponsored health care, this would have the real potential to accelerate that loss.
Mm-hmm. The governor ought to stop threatening the business community with combined reporting. He makes little digs and innuendos.
You have to explain that for our viewers.
Combined reporting is a combination for the formula of taxing corporations of revenues of Pennsylvania corporation throughout the nation. It's a complex sort of...
Okay, so in other words, it would require you to pay some taxes for income earned out of state as well as in-state.
Yes,
do I understand that right?
And it's called combined reporting. It would result in very much more complicated reporting and higher taxes for certain corporations. Okay. Now, he ought to get away from that. Now, he ought to confirm that he's going to phase out the capital stock and franchise tax in accord with the formula. That's always under threat. As a matter of fact, Rendell has more or less declared he's been very, very quiet since the federal stimulus package has been announced. He hasn't made any global statements. And he said, he said, we dodged a bullet. He ought to indicate that he's not going to raise spending. These spending.
Well, he's talking about spending more than 4%. I mean, there will in the current budget. Now we'll see what the legislature does.
That ought to come from the stimulus. That ought to come from the stimulus. He ought to be raising.
I want to go to a political question for you guys, and I always put you on the spot anyway. Gene, I'm looking right at you. I'm going to put you right on the spot. And Our inspector voted for the stimulus package, and there's another bill dealing with labor that we've talked about before called card check. We don't have to get into that. We can get into that whenever you want. But here's the point. What are you both of you hearing about what some Republicans are saying about possibly a candidate against our inspector? Pat Toomey ran against him a couple of years ago, was out, now he's back in. It looks like he may run.
Right.
What are you hearing? What's the level of concern that you think our inspector ought to have?
Well, Senator Specter has never been the darling of the ultra-right. Let's be honest. Let's get that out there. That's no shock. I mean, Pat Toomey did very well against Senator Specter the last time he ran against him. Since then, arguably, the Republican base has gotten more conservative with certain people switching out of the party.
Right,
so that's another piece of it. Two, the stimulus kind of cut both ways. Very, very conservative people, or many conservatives were very concerned. Certain businesses saw it and said, okay, it might have been necessary to do. Card check, I have yet to meet a single business person, hospital, healthcare person who said, great idea. If Senator Specter votes against business, against employers on card check, I think there's going to be a real problem.
Out there, we've gotten into this before. I'm going to get to Fred in a minute. Card check would change the way in which unions organize and get recognized by their employer. Fred.
Yes, card check would provide that if the unions got cards signed with more than 51% of the bargaining unit, without a secret election, the union would be certified. And the law now is they need a certain number of signatures. They get those signatures, and now they're...
I think it's 30%. It's 30%.
Which triggers a private ballot.
I believe Senator Specter will vote against card check. I believe Senator Specter, when he says that he only voted to cut off debate in the last session because he wanted to see changes in the NLRB,
National Labor Relations Act.
In the National Relations Act. He never said he was specifically for this principle, and I don't think he is. But I will say this. Senator Specter has damaged himself within the Republican Party and within the conservative movement by his actions on card check, his actions so far, and by his vote on the stimulus plan. He's damaged himself.
All right, we're done. We've got to get out of here. But here's the point, Gene. Business community, that's one thing that the business community is not divided on. They were divided on your point about the stimulus package.
Absolutely not.
U.S. Chamber, for example, did support the stimulus package.
They wound up supporting it for various reasons.
I understand
it.
But business and labor, I mean, they're about this. There's no meeting of the minds,
Employers are adamantly opposed to elimination of the private ballot, forced arbitration for a 2-year period. These are things that, as I say, I've yet to meet a single employer who said it's a great idea.
I've never seen the business community nationally coming together.
Labor, and on the other side.
No, but the business community on this issue, it's mobilized more than I've ever seen.
And so my point is there's almost no room for compromise in this. Good point. All right, Carolyn Scanlan's up $4 billion. How's it going to be spent? We'll find that out after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the State System of Higher Education. 14 state-owned universities. The state system is the largest provider of higher education in Pennsylvania. And by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back to the program. Carolyn Scanlan joins me as often is the case. She's the CEO of the Hospital and Health System Association. I finally, after 10 years or something, Carolyn smiles, says, Madonna, you finally got it right. All right, Carolyn, $4 billion. I mean, that's on the surface, that looks like a lot of money. How should that go? It's primarily for Medicaid, right?
It's totally for Medicaid.
Working poor who get health care, right?
It's totally for Medicaid, and it's not just working poor. It's people who are disabled, people who have high health care needs, babies, infants, pregnant women. And it is $4 billion over 3 state fiscal years of increased federal share of our Medicaid program. And our view is that Medicaid money should be used for Medicaid programs and for the Medicaid person.
Now, hold it. That leads me to a question. Just, is there flexibility in that money for Governor Rendell?
Well, where the flexibility is if the governor were to cut the state share of what he spends and use that someplace else. Now, if he does that, he gets less federal money. For every dollar that you spend, or for, let me do it a different way for people to understand, for every 40 cents that the state spends on Medicaid, they get 60 cents from the federal government.
So if they spend less, they get less, and so
we don't think that the state dollars should be cut. Now, the governor's recommended in the next fiscal year, in his budget, to cut hospital payments by $35 million of state money, which with that 40-60 split becomes $75 million.
Well, let me ask you, I mean, don't you all get so many folks, your hospitals, who walk in the door without coverage anyway? And,
Absolutely.
And you're bearing the burden of people who come in, and you're not going to kick them out. You're going to treat them. You always do. And then so that adds to the problem. If they're not covered, that means that's additional expenses
that the hospital is bearing. And as we've talked, this economic recession has impacted hospitals. We are seeing more people who are uninsured, and so that is another issue that we have talked about in the past. But even more importantly, people who have insurance that have large copays or deductibles, and they're unable to pay that. And so that becomes part of a ever-increasing bad debt number that hospitals have.
And I saw a report out, and I think your organization put one out, and then an organization called the Safety Net Association, where proposed medical assistant budget shortchanges safety net hospitals. So is there a relationship between hospitals that have a lot of sort of folks who aren't covered, or hospitals that get less money, but the burden falls more heavily on them? Am I right about that?
The area in which the cuts are proposed in the governor's budget are generally funds that go to hospitals that have a high Medicaid percentage. In other words, they're in areas where there are more people covered by Medicaid. Generally, those areas are also people who may not have insurance because they're just a little above the Medicaid eligibility salary level. So
you would argue that that's another adjustment that needs to be made?
Well, what we're saying is, where you can support the Medicaid hospitals, the high-volume hospitals, through the programs that we already have established in this state, let's do it. That's the point of the federal stimulus money. You know, there are 3 ways that you can adjust the Medicaid spending in a state. You can change who's eligible, and the strings attached to this money say you can't do that. There's a maintenance of effort of people who are eligible. You can change the benefits, lowering what you provide, and nobody would want to see that. Or you can pay providers less money. Well, it makes no sense to pay providers less money if you want those providers there, financially solvent, to be able to provide it to the people who are eligible at the benefit level that you want.
And we're going to run to a break. I want to then ask you about President Obama and how this all fits in sort of the bigger healthcare picture. But we also have the problem with specialty, with doctors and certain specialties in many parts of the state, the possibility that some hospitals won't make it. So you got all that going on at the same time. All right, great update. We'll be back with more. We're going to President Obama. What does he want to do? Is it feasible? Will it work? That following these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Penn Future, where we believe that every environmental victory grows the economy. and by the Pennsylvania Cyber Charter School, bringing educational innovation and freedom to the children of Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back. We're talking with Carolyn Scanlan, one of the leading experts in healthcare in the state. She runs the Hospital and Healthsystem Association about healthcare. Carolyn, let's broaden this discussion. You know, we're inevitably heading towards some coordinated national universal healthcare coverage. There's a whole different many ways to say this. From what you're reading in Washington, you know, where do you think President Obama wants to take this nation in terms of healthcare?
I think he wants to do a couple of things. I think he wants to make sure that people who, all Americans,
right, have
the ability to access health care. And when we say access, that generally means that you have health insurance. And I think he wants them to be able to do it through a Medicare program if you're over 65, a Medicaid program if you're poor, a program for children that goes beyond the Medicaid eligibility, coverage through your employer and giving incentives to employers to continue that, incentives to people who are unemployed to buy their COBRA or that continuation of insurance, and helping employers help employees.
So your point is that we're not looking at, we're looking at modifying the current system and expanding programs in it, not redesigning, as Senator Clinton, you know, when
it's not going to be a one program fits all.
Yeah.
And so, and he's going to move incrementally. It's not going to be like a big bang that one day it's all going to happen.
Right.
And so you can see in his stimulus package, in his proposed budget, that he has taken advantage of the moments of time to move that agenda. The last big piece are clearly for the people who are currently uninsured.
Right.
And
those numbers are growing, by the way, because of the recession. In polls that we've done, for example, we find a whole variety of problems. But go ahead.
And they aren't eligible for those other programs that I just talked about. And so his new secretary and the director of his Office of Health Reform in the White House, both of whom he announced this week, will work to try to figure out a singular program or perhaps a series of programs for those people who are currently uninsured. And I think he would want legislation in place by the end of his current term.
Okay. All right, great update. We'll have you back as this proceeds. We're going to see where he goes with the pieces of this, as you point out. All right, another edition. Gone. See you next week. And as always, stay well.